Hi, everyone. My name's Sam Meek. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Sandboxx, and I'm stepping into the spotlight on the Veteran Crowd Network.
Welcome, everybody. This is Bob Loudon, your host of the Spotlight on the Veteran Crowd Network. Very pleased to have my friend Sam Meek as our guest today. As Sam said, he's the co-founder and CEO of Sandboxx. It's a media and branding company based in Arlington, Virginia, and just has a very unique story. Sam, I'm really pleased to have you on the program today.
Yeah, well, it's great to be with you, Bob. Thanks so much for having me.
So I got to get this out right up front. Sam is a Marine veteran. We had a little delay today because he had a dental appointment running late, so we got a little late start. Got to ask you, did it take longer because they were getting the crayons out of your teeth, Sam?
Yeah,
Yeah.
specifically the red ones. They
Uh,
get lodged in the back molar so easily.
There you go. Well, it's anyway. I told you I was going to rag on you a little bit before the show, but anyway, hey, I like to start out with my guest and sort of lay the foundation. Tell everybody where you grew up and how you ended up getting into the United States Marine Corps.
Sure. So I spent most of my youth growing up in Sun Valley, Idaho, learning how to ski and being in outdoors. Being out in the outdoors with my dad and my family, and it was a tremendous place to grow up. And I come from a family of Marines, so being in the Marine Corps was always in the family lineage. And when I was in high school, the towers fell, and I knew I always wanted to join the Marine Corps, but I didn't know that I was going to be, called to serve at the time. And so I ended up enlisting in the Marine Corps right after 9/11, and joined the Marine Corps and went off to Paris Island.
Nice. So you were on the East Coast, not a Hollywood. Uh,
Well, yeah, exactly. Not one of those surfer Marines, but yeah, I ended up spending my first 2.5 years at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, with at the time second FSSG. It's now second MLG, and then did a deployment with them to Cottam. Was there for 8 months with CLR 25, making sure beans, bullets, and band-aids were getting downrange, and then came back and got selected to go to Third Recon. Went to Fallujah to become their nuclear biological chief for
mm,
the S3 there. Went to Fallujah with them, and unfortunately got injured in a non-combat injury when I was there. Got sent over to Brooke Army Medical Center down in San Antonio about 4 months into deployment, and then at that point I was coming up on my end of 5 years, so I decided to get out of the Marine Corps. But I'm very thankful that I get to scratch that itch every day with Sandboxx by feeling close to the Marines and the rest of our brothers and services in uniform.
Before we get into Sandboxx, when you came back, you went to Wall Street for a little while, worked in the hedge
Yeah,
funds and so forth. Kind of got a little bit of a finance background.
yeah. I wouldn't say I have a finance background by any means, but what I will say is I fell bass backwards into the hedge fund land. And when I got out of the Marine Corps, I started caddying, and a guy by the name of Walter Riquet, who's actually one of our Sandboxx investors. I met him on the golf course. He said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm thinking about using my GI Bill and maybe get a job, whatnot." And he said, "Why don't you come on down to my office? Let's talk about it." And what I didn't know is I was being interviewed, and in the middle of the interview, one of the analysts says, "Do you know what a hedge fund is?" And I said, "I had no idea." And that got back to Walter, and he said, "Perfect, hire him." And so I ended up
That's right.
being kind of the a personal CRM for Walter originally, and Walter would dial for dollars, and I'd sit there and take notes and listen to these sales pitches, and then a few months later, he said, "Go and do likewise." And so I started rattling around Wall Street and the family offices and pension funds, trying to help raise money for the platform.
Probably was good prep work you didn't know, but it probably set you up well for what you're doing now. So, 2011 time frame, things start happening. I was in the analog army many years ago, and mail was a big deal.
Mm.
A letter from home, or more importantly, the letter from that significant other, was a key. So let's talk a little bit about the foundation of Sandboxx. How did this all come together? And tell us a little bit about your founding partners.
Absolutely. So it really started when I received a phone call from one of my father's friends, who knew this Marine Corps general that was working on a quote MySpace for Marine Corps spouses. And I thought that was an interesting idea. And the reason why it resonated with me was because when I originally got back from my first deployment with CLR 25, I set up a MySpace page for our battalion, and it really kind of grew like wildfire. And a lot of folks started jumping on it and communicating with it. And so I that was the first time I actually saw the power of social media. I didn't connect the business dots at that time, but I knew it was pretty cool. And I was the guy in the battalion that everyone came to help customize their MySpace page and, put the music up and all the fun stuff when MySpace was growing back then. So after that, I didn't think much of it until that phone call. And I got on the phone with General Smith, and we started talking about this idea of how could we connect our Marine Corps spouses, globally in a unique way. And as we started digging into the problem statement, we realized that there was a much greater opportunity, and that was how could you build content and technology that would simplify the military journey at scale? How could you do it in today's user experience expectations? And how could you leverage a team of really smart people from product to marketing to data to operations in order to accomplish that mission? So that was the original founding ground of Sandboxx, was how could we help military spouses stay connected better?
How about that? So let's talk about a little bit about Major General Smith. He's actually Major General Ray Etoole Smith, very decorated Marine, distinguished career, Navy Cross, Vietnam veteran through, I guess, to the late 90s when he
That's right.
retired. Uh, Tell us about him. He's a little bit of a character himself, right? Are you
He,
allowed to do that in public
I
with
would
your partner?
I would say General Smith has become a just like a father to me at this point. And we talk just about every week, and some weeks we're talking every day. Just depends on what's going on. We got a lot of really fun stuff going on at the board level right now, and so I'm definitely speaking to him more often. But General Smith is just an incredible guy. He's got some of the most unique stories you'll ever hear. From growing up and young in Boys of '67, which is an incredible book about him and two other Marines that became generals out of TBS. His call sign Etoole
Yeah.
is a fantastic legend, and in his words, a legend is a lie that has a kernel of truth in it.
Uh-huh.
And so the legend has it that his weapon jammed as he was being pushed backwards by Viet Cong, and needed to change to a entrenchment tool in order to dispatch communists. And that's that's how he got the name. That's how he got the name E-Tool. So
It's a little bit of urban legend, even by his own admission, right?
yeah, right, exactly. So, but General Smith is remarkable in so many ways. In one of my favorite ways, I like to talk about the way General Smith has made such a huge impact in the business and Sandboxx is, I want to say about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, he took over all of customer service. And so when customers were chatting with Sandboxx through the app or online, it was him on the other side that was fielding these chats. And I have to say that since General Smith has stepped down from customer service, our customer service has gotten a lot softer.
Uh-huh.
And I tell you,
How do you convey the knife hand over a chat,
that's
right?
exactly right. Yeah, it's in this day and age, it's a little harder to treat your typical civilian who's using a mobile app like a young Lance Corporal.
That's right. So let's talk about the early days of Sandboxx. I mean, I can remember meeting you. We were on some panels and doing things with Bunker
Hmm.
Labs up in Northern Virginia, and going to some seminars and conferences and events. And I kind of remember when it was sort of a concept, and it was you or one or two other guys kind of licking envelopes and putting stamps on letters almost.
Yeah, Those were fun early days. We often love to look back on those. And what really happened was, we had launched Sandboxx. We were just this is 2000 end of 2014, and we are just about to launch the iOS app. We hadn't even built the Android app yet. And the premise of it was, how do you expand this thing into a real social media platform that could connect not just the military spouses, but also the warfighters and a bunch of different things. And really under the same mission statement of how do we simplify the military journey with content and technology. And we didn't have a really core acquisition strategy. And so I started thinking about the pipeline of people moving through the military. And when you think about it, they come from all over America, and then they go into the recruiting stations. And then from the recruiting stations, they go to their basic training facility. So you've got this choke point of the warfighter at this point, your kind of core customer base, moving through basic training. And we looked at basic training, and we asked ourselves, what was the greatest friction point when today's warfighter moves through basic training? And it's the disconnectivity from the phone. And it's not just for the warfighter, but it's for the friends and family around the warfighter.
Now, this wasn't as big a problem when I was a young man because we weren't all walking around with the mobile device, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's an absolute culture shock, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's actually a big recruiting problem. At times it's they've been able to sidestep it a little bit because there's been a slight culture shift in the younger generation with respect to the screen. But, nonetheless, any 18-year-old, and Bob, you and me, when we're without our cell phone for an extended period of time, we also, start to panic a little bit.
Have a panic attack, right?
Right. Exactly. So
although I do know how to read a map. Okay.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So the big thing for us is when we thought about that, I started thinking back on my days when I was deployed, and we had this cool thing called MotoMail. And MotoMail was this very simple web-based kind of contract that the DoD had, where mom or dad could look you up and what unit you're in. They, tap you in that unit, and they could type a letter online, hit send. You could be out at some fob in the middle of nowhere, or a place like, Fallujah, and a Humvee would come rolling up. They'd link up the satellites, and these printers would start printing out these letters. And you could get letters, within, if you timed it right, within minutes of, mom, dad, or your brother sending you a letter, and the truck and the printer being there at the right time. So it was this really neat service, and they actually ended up shutting it down in 2013. And I thought about that service, and I said, well, why don't we just take that same model and apply it to basic training? And this could be not only an acquisition strategy for us, but a revenue strategy. And to date, that's been the thing that's carried Sandboxx to, where we are today.
So with that as the as the foundation, how has the product line for the company expanded in the last 5 years?
Yeah. So most of our efforts have been, so when you break down the product lines, we look at it in a couple different ways. And we look at it along the timeline of joining the military with three very specific stakeholders. The first stakeholder being the warfighter, the second stakeholder being the friends and family around the warfighter, and that third stakeholder being the command and the Department of Defense themselves. And so as you look at those three stakeholders and how they move through a military journey, starting from I'm thinking about joining the military to I'm going to basic training, on to I'm getting out of basic training, there's a lot that goes on there, and anybody who's ever been in the military, has friends and family in the military, understands that. And so we started breaking down the friction points that exist along each part of that journey, from recruiting into the delayed entry program, into the military entrance processing station, MEPS, into basic training, and into graduation. And we started creating product and content around those micro friction points. And so we started with how do we get our warfighters ready for basic training? So if you've got a young, son or daughter that wants to join the Navy, and they show up to a recruiting station, a Navy recruiter is going to tell them, hey, you should download Sandboxx because they're going to help you get ready for basic training. And then that app is then going to prompt you to share Sandboxx with your parents and say, hey, there's a bunch of great content here for parents to help them get mentally ready to release their baby into the Navy. And so there's a lot that goes on there. And then and so one of our main one of our main products that we like to classify is really our content delivery platform. So we think about highly segmented audiences and what's relevant to them, and how do we timely deliver that content so that they could feel satisfied about wherever they are along their military journey, whether they're a Navy mom or a young soldier waiting for their ship date to boot camp. The second is, and which is really what we're most well known for, is our letters platform. And, as you know, there's about, 225 to 250 million folks that join the military every year. And each one of them gets disconnected as they get to basic training. For the Marines, it's a little bit longer. For the Air Force, it's a little bit shorter. But, it's anywhere from 2 to 3 months, and sometimes longer, depending on what your job skill is going to be in the military. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, we really focus on how can we keep that mom and that son, or, that spouse group better connected with the letters platform. So today, we acquire about 70% of the DoD as they join the military. So we acquire them either through our relationships with the recruiting command, or the way that we operate with the USOs on base at the airports, or the relationships that we have with the commands. And
that's an amazing number. I mean, 70% of the onboarding military personnel are signing up for your product right now.
Yeah, so
that's incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really cool, and it comes down to the fact that we've spent all this time building brand trust with the folks that are joining the military, with the recruiters, with the recruiting schools, with the commands that operate the recruiting schools. So we're trying to create a lot of this, what we call memory trust, that persists in command, so that when that new commanding officer steps on deck, or that new staff sergeant steps on deck into that recruiting station, that Sandboxx is already part of the vernacular, is already part of the culture. And this is what's enabled us to, continually acquire a large swath of the folks that are moving through the military. And so I think right now, it's something in the realm of 20 to 25% of the DoD signs up for Sandboxx before they even get the basic training. And then we get the rest of them as they get to boot camp. And so in locations like Parris Island, South Carolina, we've got a gentleman, actually Paul Davis, who runs all military relationships for us at the installations. He gives all 600 brand new Marines a brief on Sandboxx. At this point, they've lost access to their phone, but it's the very first time that they've actually known what their mailing address is. And so what he does is he hands out these things called Sandboxx address cards. And these cards enable the family members to enable the recruit to be able to add, mom, dad, sibling, brothers and sisters, and everyone else, girlfriend, buddies from the football team on that card. And then we have a team of military spouses that will transcribe that card and send out text messages and emails to onboard the social circle around that individual recruit. And so we're doing that across the DoD, and it's different at each installation, but that's kind of the crux of it.
So a couple of kind of detailed questions now, because you're making me think about this. So new recruit comes in, signs your card. Typically, how many points of contact are you capturing because of that one recruit?
It's about 4.1.
Okay.
And we have a 70% conversion rate to paying customers.
And our second question, 2.5 million people in the military overall. How did you go after the folks that kind of were already in? And what's sort of the makeup, officer versus enlisted, maybe? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Well, so most of our time has really been spent around what we define as the first year of service. So those that are in recruiting or interested in joining the military, all the way up to the end of basic training. And if it weren't for COVID, we would actually be stepping into, life after basic training, which we're now doing at this point from a product strategy perspective. So the lion's share of what we do and how we generate revenue and our customers are around that first year of service. So anyone from recruiting to the end of basic training. So, as we're looking forward, we're now looking at, we bought a company last year that we're integrating into Sandboxx. We're developing some new product strategy that is, uniquely focused around what are the friction points that exist directly after basic training, getting to your advanced school, understanding how do you start to climb that career ladder. What are the things that are specific to your job as you get to your first duty station? What are the things that are specific to your personal life as you get to that first duty station? So a lot of the things that you and I had to kind of figure out on our own, or if we had if we had a lucky, good platoon sergeant or a good captain who took us under our wing, we may have figured things out a little quicker. But in this case, it's really leveraging the technology and more so the content to serve hyper relevant things to you wherever you are along your military journey.
I'm gonna shift gears now, and I want to talk about your journey as an entrepreneur. But I got one sort of tongue-in-cheek question for you. I've seen your mailing operation and videos and so forth. How do you spray perfume on that private's letter? From his girlfriend. You got that one
You know,
figured out yet?
that is a feature request I've been asking my team for since the beginning. And
You need drop a little vial of it in there or something. You
we've actually,
smash it when it gets there.
we've got one of the cool. So we've got this amazing machine called the DI 2000. It's our partner Pitney Bowes helped us custom make this thing. It's a $500,000 machine, and one of the cool things that we can do with it is you've got these 4 inserter trays, and they're variable inserters, so you can put like certain types of cards on top. And so the idea that we've come up with, and I don't know when we'll pull the trigger on this, but I hope we do at some point, is we'll be able to insert scratch and sniff cards.
I knew it was there. And look, I'll tell you what, the olfactory lobes are important.
Let me tell you, we did some polling on this, and guess what the number one requested scent to be sent was?
I can't imagine.
It's a fart.
Oh no. Oh no, man. Oh God.
Yeah.
That goes in the Dear John letter, I imagine.
Yeah. So
well, let's shift gears to Sam, the entrepreneur, because you've been on a real entrepreneurial journey here. And let's talk about, you mentioned an acquisition. Let's talk about your acquisition strategy, part of the growth of the company, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, we don't have much of an acquisition strategy per se. We've looked at a handful of companies and apps and tools that have come up for sale over the years, or kind of bumbling along, and they need some sort of strategic partner. And so we do look at those things from time to time. In this case, this made a lot of sense because it was a pocket reference app for the Marine Corps that was built, I want to say 10 years ago, by a gunnery sergeant who saw a real need for this pocket reference information to be on the mobile. It's called iCore. And so we bought it, we revamped it, and we relaunched it, and we did a lot of things around measurement to see, where the propensity in the app was for usage, looking at a lot of the different kind of behavior data to understand, who and why is using what parts of this app. And some of that stuff we are now folding back into Sandboxx to think about life after basic training. And so it's simple things like, how do you organize a ribbon rack? How do you attach this type of truck to this type of shipping device, or cadences for running, or physical fitness scores. One of the cool things that we're working on right now is actually a promotion predictor using manpower data, regressing that back. We can actually predict when you're going to get promoted. And so a bunch of really cool, interesting little tools that will be very specific to that kind of second year service, life after basic training.
Interesting stuff. So you've also grown the team pretty much, and you've got a pretty sizable team now. Talk a little bit about that and the types of people and the culture you're trying to build.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I have to say, if it weren't for the team, we wouldn't be here. And every single person that's on the Sandboxx team that does one thing or another is equally important. And I can't stress how important it is when, especially as a young startup, to really be selective about the talent that you bring on board, and a focus on that culture, because you only really have one shot to, define that culture from the beginning. And it takes a lot of constant work, and you got to bring the right people on board that, will do the right thing consistently and will, follow the culture guidelines that are more not necessarily ingrained in, what Sam or what General Smith or what Swami says, but more in line with, what's natural to them. And so, as we've grown the team, we've got over, 50 teammates at this point, and knock on wood, we're going to be up to 60 by the end of the year. We've got 6 hires right now that we want to try and close up by the end of the year, and potentially some more. And so for us, it's really, important that, as we're, very carefully thinking about our growth strategies, that we're timing those growth strategies with the right new people to come on board. And I'll give you an example of one that we're doing right now. So we've got to bring on someone who's just an incredible data scientist. We've got a lot of great folks on board that are very good at running experiments and testing and optimizing things. But we don't have anybody on the team that can, take a spreadsheet and slice it 6 ways from Sunday and run this cohort analysis and say, oh, hey, we think the elasticity of the $8 bundle is slightly mispriced because of X, Y, and Z. Or we noticed that moms who live in California, if they open the app, 2 times within the first week, they're 6 times as likely to continue to engage with the content over time. And those are some of the big questions that we're constantly asking that require an immense amount of thoughtful approach to behavior data. And so we're now bringing someone on board that can help tackle all those questions and really own the data scientist side of the house for our users' behavior.
Well, this leads me to a lot of questions. Has the COVID environment amplified the need for your product in itself? And the second question to that is, how has COVID impacted you from an operational standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll bundle those together. So when COVID hit, the first thing that the DoD did was they suspended family graduations.
And I had one I couldn't go to for our
right.
son. Right.
They suspended graduations. And so, we actually 2 years ago stood up a travel business, which was really doing great, and was focused on getting the 1.2 million family members to a military graduation each year. And in the midst of COVID hitting, our travel business obviously went to a donut because of that.
Right.
And so, and as I mentioned earlier, this year we were looking to focus our product strategy and the vision of the company on life after basic training. But we had to kind of pull back and reevaluate things and really kind of focus on short-term revenue gains, because the travel business went to zero. And then what happened was we saw the Department of Defense start to suspend young recruits and trainees actually shipping to basic training. And so we had
they couldn't figure out how to keep them socially distanced. I mean,
that's exactly right. They had to put all those processes in place. So you look at what happened in Q1. They suspended the family members. So the family members ended up engaging with Sandboxx a lot more. We had a blowout Q1. It was fantastic. Q2 hit, and they started slowing the amount of shipping rates to basic training, and things started to kind of slide downhill for us. So instead of purely focusing on future product strategy, we said, all right, let's put that on pause. Let's focus on some little wins and some ideas that we think can be kind of tactical revenue generators. And the first thing, and I guess the most valuable thing that we have done, in this process has been standing up the Sandboxx shop, experimenting with subscriptions, and really getting like hyper micro and very detailed about how do we make 50 basis points wins here and there by switching a screen or changing up some sort of behavior as people come into Sandboxx, and really kind of measuring lifetime value of our customers, and measuring the happiness meter and the net promoter score, and a lot of things that are incredibly important to how you actually end up growing an organization. And so much of what we did was around experimentation, as we kind of moved into Q1 and into Q2. And, looking at, early Q1, we came in with this kind of shop that was, had a couple of things in it that we were experimenting with, and we really invested in it. And one of our teammates, Stephen K, went off just ran with it, and the business is doing incredibly well now, and it's the fastest growing product line within Sandboxx at this point. So it was neat to see how our organization was significantly impacted by COVID, and the way that we reacted to it and turned it into a positive. And so the cool thing about, the rest of, I'd say, the next 12 months, maybe the next 8 months, is that, our business has a little bit of seasonality to it, because most people join the military during the summer months. And then as the winter months come in, we see less folks joining the military. Well, because of that pullback, they're now they have that pent up demand for basic training, the pent up supply for basic training. So those young men and women have to ship off to basic training. And, from the accession numbers that we're getting from the DoD, we're going to see those heightened levels, throughout the winter, which is really exciting for us. And so now, looking forward, we've got these heightened levels of basic training ship rates. We've got this new product that is doing really well for the family members, and we've optimized our letter business very well. And on top of that, we've reconstructed our entire travel business. So whenever travel comes back, we've got a lot of really neat product lines that are ready to fire on all cylinders.
That's great. Well, you're very much a data-driven company. Then let's talk about one big role for the CEO in an early stage or a growth business is raising capital.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about that journey. You've probably done a lot of that and learned a lot of great lessons. What can you share with the audience about that trail?
Sure, absolutely. Well, learning how to raise capital in the alternative asset world, and then learning how to raise capital, in the startup world was there's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences, and mostly it comes down to the grit and the scrappiness, I think. So, I think one of the great mistakes I made early on was I went out and would raise, we raised our first $500,000 from Knight Capital, which was a bank on Wall Street, which is no longer there. One of our founding board members, Tom Joyce, was the CEO and chairman at the time, and he had heard about Sandboxx through some family friends, and invited me up to the Knight Tower in Jersey City to meet with the board. And they decided to invest. He invested personally alongside that, and that was our first money in. So we were off to the races. And the mistake that I made was I started building at that time. I started saying, let's go put this money to work, and it's a very natural habit. But I would venture to say the best thing that you can do is focus on raising all of the money, then get to work, because the switching costs associated with from working, playing with product, experimenting, trying things out and failing, to, oh, geez, I've only got, half a payroll in the bank account, I got to go shake some trees down, is pretty immense. So, for the first, I think, 2.5 years of Sandboxx life, we were raising our A round. And I was consistently, collecting 25 here, 100 here, all over the place. And a lot of the early investors that came in the A round, they took more of the risk. And those late A round investors took less of the risk, because at that time we had more product and we had more experience, and we at least thought we knew what we were doing at that point. The other thing that I think I learned along the way was really focus on getting no's, because there are so many people that will drag you along and say, oh, I need more time, I need to think about this. So, and the amount of effort you put into the maybes out there is truly immense. And so, if someone's a maybe, depending on how it feels and where you are, you might as well just go ahead and throw them in the no bucket and not even focus on them, because the amount of effort you spend on the maybes could be spent on potential news and potential yeses. And that is one area where, I think I made more mistakes along the way, was trying to trying to get the maybes to fall into the yes category. When and I look back on it, all my yeses were like, yeah, we're in, absolutely. Like, one day, 2 days went by. Hey, Sam, we're in.
Yeah.
And I go back and I think about the time that I spent trying to get a handful of people that one person I think dragged on for over a year saying, oh, let me do this. Maybe let me think about it. So, and then my last kind of lesson learned about capital raising is anybody who is willing to write a check also has a friend that is willing to write a check. And if you focus on the network around your individual investors, you're going to be able to get to speed and get to take off speed a little bit quicker, because those people have already spoken with their checkbook. They can turn around to their friend and say, I'm in for 25, I'm in for 100, whatever the case may be. And they're going to have their credibility on the line versus trying to network some new people who, really you got to kind of explain the whole pitch again. And at the end of the day, we are beings that will trust our social network. That's what makes us human in many ways. And that investor community is so tight around each individual person. And so for those that are raising capital, focus on the people around that individual that just wrote a check, because I guarantee you there's at least 10 people around that individual that can do something. Now, it may not be sizable, but it's going to be a lot easier to get 10 grand, 25 grand out of this individual than going to some new institution and trying to shake down 200, 250. So those are kind of my favorite three things to think about from capital raising on some of the mistakes that I made early on, and where I've learned, and hopefully other entrepreneurs can learn.
Sam, you're becoming a mentor. My last question is, because here you are sharing this sage advice, right? But who have been some of the mentors that you would point to over the last 5 to 10 years that you really think, deserve a shout out for helping you get here?
Oh, Bob, well, thanks. You know, there's a lot.
You might miss somebody. It'll
Yeah,
be like the Academy Awards. We'll
yeah.
apologize if we leave
Well,
somebody
I
out.
have
But
to say, I have to start. Obviously, my wife is just incredible. She helps me think through so many things and see things from different angles that I would have never pointed out. My executive team is tremendous. We all come together every 2 weeks for our executive meeting, and we don't agree on everything, but we thoughtfully step through the strategy
you've
and the decision
created an
we're making.
environment where you can do that.
It's
That's important.
yeah, and that's one of the things that I love is when someone doesn't agree with something, they raise their hand, they say, this doesn't feel right, and here's why, and we have a powwow about it, and we
Right.
can generally get to a resolution about it. So I love that. The General Smith has just an incredible man in my life, personally and professionally, and the way he helps me see the world and helps me personally grow, and is consistently a champion of the long-term vision of Sandboxx is something that I couldn't miss. And we've got an amazing group of advisors, from Dan Mudd to Mike Perlis to Joyce Carroll, my father-in-law Grant Gregory. Some people that you spend 20 minutes with them and you change the way you think about things, because they've run massive organizations, they've seen problems, they've understood differences in personality. And when you have the opportunity to spend time with people that have made significant changes with inside organizations and created incredible companies, it fundamentally changes your perspective of the art of the possible, because you literally can do anything when you set your mind to it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts.
That is a great place for us to conclude. Sam Meek, the CEO of Sandboxx, thank you so much for being our guest and for stepping into the spotlight.
Bob, it's been great to be with you, and Semper Fidelis.
Bravo Zulu to you. You've been listening to the Spotlight on the Veteran Crowd Network. We publish on Tuesdays and Fridays, and we're available on various podcast platforms like Apple, Google, and Spotify. Thanks so much for listening. We're also trying to kick off our YouTube channel, and so those of you that like to watch as opposed to listen, please look up the Veteran Crowd on the YouTube platform and sign up and subscribe. And that's a wrap.